I am Aurelia Dalton, 36 years old, and right there at my niece's birthday party at Dalton Crest Vineyard. My mother, Janet Dalton, cut the large birthday cake, handed slices to each child, laughing under the golden sunlight, then stopped exactly in front of my daughter, Mira. She looked at my little girl for 1 second, cold as stone. No, this piece isn't for her. Mira froze, her eyes widening, and the chatter around the long table suddenly fell silent as if someone had flipped a switch. No one moved. No one spoke up. I held my daughter's hand, feeling her tiny fingers trembling. "We're leaving," I said, turning away from the vineyard without looking back, but that small cut had struck the deepest part of me. Before I tell you what happened after that, the things that nearly destroyed my entire life, and also the very things that helped me rise again, please do me one small favor. Leave the name of the city you're watching from in the comments below, so I can know that I'm not the only one who's ever felt rejected by her own family. 3 weeks before that party, I had the chance to avoid all of it. But I didn't. That afternoon, sunlight slid through the window of my studio in downtown Asheville, falling across the unfinished loft renovation sketches. The air smelled like freshly cut pine wood and cooled coffee. I was trying to note down the measurements for the kitchen cabinets when my phone buzzed. On the screen, Mom, Janet Dalton. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened, and my heartbeat shifted slow. Then fast, like a rhythm I had memorized since the days I still lived at Dalton Crest Vineyard. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up, "Aurelia," my mother said in that sweet voice of hers, sharp as the rim of a glass. "Next week is Reed's birthday. The whole family will be there. And Mira will be coming. Won't she?" It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in family velvet. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the sketch in front of me but seeing nothing. The pencil lines I drew minutes ago suddenly blurred. "You don't need to force me if I began." But she cut in immediately. "Family needs to be together. Everyone wants to see you, and little Mira will love it." I knew that line. Janet Dalton only mentioned Mira when she wanted me to give in. The problem was it always worked. Mira often asked why her grandparents never visited, why every holiday was just the two of us. I had seen her eyes following other kids running into their grandparents' arms in the school courtyard, and I didn't want Mira to grow up with the same sense of lack I had. "All right," I said softly. "We'll come." A 1-second pause. Then Janet laughed with satisfaction, so quickly that my answer sounded like it had always been part of her plan. My shoulders tightened, and my heartbeat shifted slow. Then fast, like a rhythm I had memorized since the days I still lived at Dalton Crest Vineyard. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up, "Aurelia," my mother said in that sweet voice of hers, sharp as the rim of a glass. "Next week is Reed's birthday. The whole family will be there. And Mira will be coming. Won't she?" It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in family velvet. Her excitement was so big it almost made me believe things could be different this time. That Janet might actually be trying to change. Fooling myself once again. After Mira fell asleep, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop to finish some drawings I needed to send to a client. But when the inbox loaded, I saw an old thread of emails from Blue Ridge Elementary PTA, where Janet served as treasurer. One subject line hit me: "Quarterly budget update. Reimbursement attached." I clicked it open. The numbers were not right. Or at least, they didn't match the expenses. I remembered from the time Mira sold fundraising cookies at school. I scrolled to the bottom of the file. In the reimbursement section, there appeared a several $1,000 entry signed J. Dalton. I froze. I shut the screen before I could look closer. But that moment planted the very first seed of a storm I didn't yet know was coming. Before I stepped into the car that would take me back to Dalton Crest, I already knew my family had never been a safe place. I still remember the smell of oak in the old living room of the Vineyard house, a warm, heavy scent that should have felt familiar. But to me, it always brought back the evenings when my mother, Janet Dalton sat in her large armchair praising Trenton as if he had been touched by magic while I was merely the background. Trenton is the future of Dalton Crest. All that drawing will never amount to anything. She said that when I was 14. I still remember the tightness in my throat as I looked down at the sketch I had hidden inside my sleeve, a drawing of a sunlit room I dreamed of designing with my own hands. Trenton looked at me with pity. Or arrogance. Even now. I'm not sure. But what I am sure of, I grew up in a house where one child was placed on a pedestal, and the other was treated like a shadow. All that drawing will never amount to anything. She said that when I was 14. I still remember the tightness in my throat as I looked down at the sketch I had hidden inside my sleeve, a drawing of a sunlit room I dreamed of designing with my own hands. Trenton looked at me with pity. Or arrogance. Even now. I'm not sure. But what I am sure of, I grew up in a house where one child was placed on a pedestal, and the other was treated like a shadow. Who says something like that at a funeral? Who says that about their own grandchild? From that moment, I knew I had to leave Dalton Crest so Mira wouldn't grow up in the same darkness I had endured. I moved to Asheville. I built my own small studio and tried to start over. Every holiday, I sent cards to the vineyard, a distant courtesy. Nothing more. Janet replied with a few short messages or with silence. Mira began to notice. In the courtyard of Blue Ridge Elementary, she watched her friends run into their grandparents' arms. She looked at me, her eyes clear and questioning. Mom, did I do something wrong? Is that why they don't like me? That question hurt more than anything Janet had ever said to me. I couldn't tell her that the Dalton family had two standards, one for Trenton, one for me and my child. I couldn't tell her that my mother only cared about bloodlines and the family image, and I could never tell her that Mira, with her small heart and her natural kindness, was the one placed outside the invisible border of her own family. It's not your fault. I was all I said. But Mira still looked down at her shoes every time she asked. While packing for the trip, I opened a small drawer and found an old photograph. Me at 8 years old standing next to Trenton at a party at the vineyard. Janet had both hands on Trenton's shoulders, proud as if he were her flawless creation, and me, standing off to the side, smiling awkwardly, like a guest invited out of obligation rather than love. That picture haunted me for years. Now it lay there again. Like a reminder, Janet Dalton hadn't changed. I had simply forgotten. And what I didn't know was, the old wounds were only whispers before the storm. What was about to happen at Dalton Crest would make those memories seem small. If I had known that her smile that night would be the last peaceful moment before the storm, maybe I would have held Mira a little longer. When I arrived to pick Mira up from the after-school art club, she was standing by the window, her hands covered in watercolor, her face bright like Asheville's late winter sun. When she saw me, Mira ran over, her backpack bouncing behind her. Mom, today I painted a horse. I think this horse will live at Dalton Crest. She held up the still wet paper. So proud, her eyes curved into 2 tiny crescent moons. Just seeing her, I felt my heart soften a little. We drove home as the sky turned violet. I made Mira's favorite dish, baked mac and cheese with golden melted cheese. Mira was swinging her legs under the chair when I said, gently, like a breeze drifting across a still lake, this week, your grandparents invited us back to Dalton Crest for Reed's birthday. Mira dropped her spoon. Really? Mom, I get to see Grandpa Norman. Do I get to ride horses? Do we make s'mores? Do we get to run around the vineyard? Her questions came down like a sudden rain shower. Her face was so bright, I had to look away for a second to hide the churn of emotion in my chest. All of that? Mira, I said, we're going to have a fun weekend. Mira squealed softly, then hugged me a small hug, but full of trust. After dinner, Mira ran to her room to grab colored paper and dragged her big marker box to the dining table. Mom, I want to make a card for Reed, can I? I nodded. Mira began folding paper, sticking on horse stickers and cowboy hat stickers, and even cutting out a tiny vineyard gate to glue onto the card. She stuck her tongue out a little every time she attached something important, a habit that made me smile even as my chest felt heavy. I folded clothes into the suitcase while watching her, the warm light of the table lamp shining on her hair, making Mira look like she had stepped out of a painting I wished I could keep forever. But in that warm glow, a quiet sigh escaped me, one I didn't even realize had slipped out. I wanted to believe my mother had changed. I wanted to believe Mira would be treated kindly. I wanted to believe old pain would not repeat itself. But from the corner of the kitchen, the apron I had just adjusted swayed slightly when Mira said, "I hope Daisy will like me. I'll show her the little horse I painted in class." That simple sentence pierced my heart like a cold needle. I had said that same sentence when I was Mira's age, and I knew I had waited forever for something that never came. When I turned off Mira's light, she hugged her stuffed bear, her eyes sparkling. "Mom, I think this time will be different. Who wouldn't want more people in their family?" I brushed her hair. "Sleep. Mira, we have a lot to do tomorrow." I closed the door but stayed standing in the dark for a few seconds, listening to my heartbeat drop heavy like pebbles tumbling down a stream. That night, I tried to sleep, but Janet's words from the funeral echoed in my head like a warning. Mira is not Dalton blood, and I knew this peace would not last. The moment the car turned past the stone archway of Dalton Crest, I knew I had made a mistake. The entrance was covered in white gravel, with 2 rows of grapevines stretching long like green ribbons wrapping around the road. Mira pressed her face to the window, her eyes shining. "Mom, look, I see the stables. I see Spotty too." I gave a weak smile, swallowing down the tightness building in my throat. Dalton Crest was always beautiful, in a cruel way, the kind of beauty that made you forget the pain that once lived here. We stopped in front of the main house. The smell of pine wood, the scent of barbecue from the backyard, the laughter of guests, all of it blended together, creating the illusion of a perfect family gathering. If only it weren't my mother's house. Janet Dalton stepped out the door, wearing a white linen dress, her smile soft, but her eyes cold like dew that never warms. If I had known that her smile that night would be the last peaceful moment before the storm, maybe I would have held Mira a little longer. When I arrived to pick Mira up from the after-school art club, she was standing by the window, her hands covered in watercolor, her face bright like Asheville's late winter sun. When she saw me, Mira ran over, her backpack bouncing behind her. "Mom, today I painted a horse. I think this horse will live at Dalton Crest." Mira looked around Mom. "Where do I sit?" Janet walked inside and returned carrying a folding metal chair, slightly rusted. "You sit here. This chair is acceptable for Mira." Acceptable. No one else had to use an acceptable chair. Mira sat down, her knees level with the tabletop because the chair was much shorter than the others. She still tried to smile. She ran to give the handmade card to Janet. "I made this for Reed." Janet glanced at it for exactly 1 second. Cute. Leave it there." Then she placed the card on the cabinet by the door, the one filled with dirty shoes and old cleaning rags. Not for Reed. Not on the gift table. Not where anyone would see it. I watched Mira's shoulders droop like a small petal hit by wind. Mira ran toward the stables, where a few kids were being led around on horses. She asked permission. The manager nodded, but Janet appeared right behind her. "Oh no. Those boots aren't appropriate. Just go to the petting zoo down there." Mira stood still for a few seconds, then nodded, pressing her lips together. I wanted to object, but Janet had already turned away. During the sack race, Mira tripped near the starting line. Janet laughed, her voice light but cutting. "It's fine. Mira isn't used to these kinds of games." But when Daisy Trenton's daughter finished second, Janet pulled her into a hug and said, "Good job. Sweetheart, that's the Dalton spirit." Dalton. That name was always a medal Janet only gave to those she deemed worthy. I stood at the edge of the yard, watching Mira pet a baby goat in the small petting zoo. her eyes following the group of kids allowed to join the priority games. The feeling was so familiar it made me nauseous. I had stood in that exact place once, watching my mother tilt the whole world toward Trenton. Mira didn't cry, but I could see the rim of her eyes growing slightly red. The birthday song began. Everyone gathered around the giant horse-themed birthday cake. Mira stood a little farther back, her eyes shining, waiting for her turn. And my hand tightened around the strap of my bag until my fingertips turned white. A very clear instinct. The worst hadn't happened yet. When Janet picked up the knife to cut the cake and the children lined up in front of her, Mira rose onto her toes, smiling thinly like a last fragment of hope. What I didn't know was that in just a few minutes, my daughter's heart would be crushed. The moment I stepped inside for exactly 40 minutes, Mira's world collapsed in that same amount of time. My phone rang just as Mira was playing under the grape trellis with a few of Trenton's neighbor kids. I glanced at the caller, a client from Salt Lake City pushing the redesign of a hotel lobby. They had postponed the deadline 2 times already. I couldn't ignore it again. Ari, we need to revise the draft now. Zoom call in 3 minutes. I looked out into the yard. Mira was laughing, chasing a baby goat, her hair flying in the wind. Everything looked peaceful. I'll head into the main house, I said. Give me a few minutes to open my laptop. Those words, a few minutes, would haunt me for weeks. I sat in the old living room of Dalton Crest and opened my laptop. The room still smelled like old beeswax and polished pine, just like the years when I was the unnoticed child in the corner. During the meeting, I adjusted interior color palettes while hearing laughter drifting in from the yard. My hands moved across the keyboard, but my mind wasn't calm. At one point, I froze. I didn't hear Mira anymore. I reassured myself kids run everywhere. The meeting lasted 38 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the client said, "Good job, Aurelia," I closed the laptop with no sense of relief. I stepped out onto the back porch. A golden sunset poured over the yard, bright enough to sting my eyes. Guests were gathering around the birthday cake table. But Mira, she was sitting alone on the wooden steps leading to the stables, her knees pulled to her chest, her hands clasped tight. Her face was buried, her shoulders trembling. My heart collapsed. The world flipped upside down. Mira. I ran to her. She lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red. "Mom, I don't want everyone to see me crying." Her voice was tiny, like leaves brushing against each other. "What happened?" Sweetheart, Mira spoke in broken bits. "When you left, Grandma Janet cut the cake. She gave Daisy first, then Reed, then all the other kids." She inhaled sharply, her chest rising. I waited. A lady asked if I wanted a slice, but Grandma said, I placed my hand on her back. "It's okay. Tell me." Mira hiccuped. She said I don't belong at this party, that I'm not one of them. That sentence didn't just cut Mira. It cut me right across the same scar I had when I was her age. I inhaled deeply, forcing my voice steady. "Stay here. I'll be right back." I walked straight into the main house. Every step felt like pressing on a boulder lodged in my chest. I heard Janet talking in the kitchen, her voice cheerful, as if she had just achieved something noble. The sentence that crushed every bit of hope I'm being honest with Spring. Janet scoffed. "That girl Mira isn't Dalton blood. We don't need to pretend she's family." Spring said something quietly, but Janet continued. "This is a Dalton day. Not hers. Not hers." I stood at the doorway. My palms were sweating. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. The door was slightly open, just enough for her voice to slip through. Not because I wanted to trap anyone, but because I knew if I repeated it, no one would believe me. I walked back to the party table and cut a large slice of cake, added a sugar horse on top, sprinkled some chocolate Mira loved. She looked up when she saw me. "Why doesn't Grandma like me?" "Mom." That question stabbed through years. "It's not your fault." I said, placing the slice into her hands. It is never your fault. Mira leaned against me, weak, but still trying to smile. That night, after Mira fell asleep in the guest room, I sat alone on the porch steps and opened the recording. Janet's voice echoed. "Am cold as a Blue Ridge winter? She's not a real Dalton." I pressed save. That was the moment I knew I would not run anymore. That night, a part of me, the part that feared my mother all my life, died. And the one who rose was no longer Janet Dalton's daughter. That night, when Mira was asleep, I opened my laptop and knew I was about to do something I had never dared to do my entire life. After soothing Mira to sleep on the guest sofa in the lavender-scented room, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door gently. The Dalton Crest house lay still, but inside me, a quiet fire was rising. I opened my laptop and pulled up the recording of Janet speaking to Spring in the kitchen. The part where she said, "She's not a real Dalton. We don't need to pretend she's family." I emailed it to Amelia Rhodes, a civil attorney in Asheville, the one who had helped me with contract disputes before. In less than 10 minutes, she called back. "Ari, this isn't just discriminatory behavior. This is extremely damaging evidence against her," Amelia said, her voice sharp as steel. "And those PTA transaction copies you sent, that's embezzlement. If we forward this to the PTA board or the district, they'll investigate immediately." I clenched my hand. "Can you help me? I'll prepare everything for you." Amelia sent a PDF nearly 30 pages thick PTA transparency report, Dalton County. The evidence was arranged clearly and logically, with a 30-second audio excerpt edited to protect Mira. I only had to do one thing: press send. The next day was the Blue Ridge Community Fundraiser, where Janet was the primary coordinator, like a queen standing on the stage of a glory she built for herself. I brought Mira to Sam so she wouldn't be anywhere near the chaos. Then I walked into the Dalton County Community Center alone, a wide wooden hall with strands of warm lights overhead. The tables and chairs already arranged neatly. People chatted and picked up snacks. The PTA information board stood at the entrance. I stood in a corner, blending in. Janet emerged from the back door, wearing a dusty rose dress, smiling wide as if she had never shattered a child's heart. "Thank you all for being here. The Dalton family always puts community first," she said, her voice echoing through the microphone with self-satisfaction. Inside my coat pocket, my phone screen showed the email waiting. "To all parents, Blue Ridge Elementary Subject PTA Transparency Report urgent," with the evidence attached. My hand trembled slightly, but not from fear. I had been waiting for this moment since I was 8 years old. I inhaled and pressed send. It took exactly 7 seconds. A parent in the third row looked at her phone and frowned. Then another. Then a third. Screen after screen lit up like a swarm of fireflies suddenly glowing in the dark. "What is this?" I heard someone say. A mother opened the audio file right there. Janet's voice burst across the refreshment area like a blade slicing through the air. "She's not a real Dalton. No need to pretend she's family." The murmurs swelled instantly. Another parent held up his phone. "These PTA funds, whose account is this going into? Oh my God, it's Janet on stage." Janet scanned the room, her face draining of color. She blinked rapidly, trying to force a strained smile. Surely, there must be some misunderstanding. But no one was listening to her anymore. The PTA board president stepped forward. "Mrs. Dalton, please step outside." Immediately, some people began recording. Others moved aside to let her pass. Janet froze. For the first time, she no longer controlled the room. Her eyes searched the crowd. They landed on me. I looked back unblinking, unbowed, unapologetic. For the first time in my life, I stood tall. I was no longer her frightened child. When the doors of the hall closed behind Janet, I knew this was only the first collapse. And tomorrow, all of Dalton Crest would face a truth it could no longer avoid. I woke up the next morning with a strange feeling, Not fear, but calm. News traveled through the small town faster than I expected. Early in the morning, when I opened my phone, messages from Blue Ridge Elementary parents poured in. I'm sorry for what happened to Mira. Thank you for having the courage to speak the truth. Janet has been suspended. They're going to audit the entire fund. No one mentioned my name with disrespect. No one treated me like the shadow of Dalton Crest anymore. Trenton didn't text. Spring only sent one short message. I'm sorry. I didn't know things were that bad. But that was enough. I didn't need them to understand everything just to stay far away from Mira's life. Mira sat in the back seat, hugging her stuffed bear, sleeping peacefully as if the entire world had softened. Noon light streamed through the window, making the day feel almost unreal. I glanced at the rearview mirror, looking at her small face. Her eyelashes still a little puffy. You will grow up in a family that knows love, I whispered, like a promise sent into the air. As the car pulled away from Dalton Crest, the rows of grapevines shrank behind us, and for the first time in many years, I didn't feel any longing at all. A few weeks later, life slowed down in a gentle way. My design studio received a major contract from the Blue Ridge Design Group, a loft renovation project I had dreamed of for so long. The client said, "We looked through your portfolio. You have a very honest perspective." I smiled, maybe because I had stopped trying to become someone the Dalton family wanted me to be. Mira grew brighter each day. She returned to school, telling her friends about the baby goat at Dalton Crest, except for the rest of the story. In the evenings, she sat at the dining table, using her colored markers to draw the vineyard gate, but this time, she added both of us standing outside it. One morning, Mira proudly showed me a handmade badge. I belong here. She pinned it to her backpack and grinned wide. I looked at her, and that piece inside me made my eyes sting for a second. The day Mira ran into her classroom, with the new badge sparkling on her backpack, I stood at the school gate for a long moment. Sunlight glowed on her hair, and in that instant, I understood something I spent years trying to escape the shadow of Dalton Crest. But through everything, Mira and I built a new circle, small, but warm enough to shelter us. For years, I thought I needed to belong to someone. But it turns out, as long as Mira and I choose each other, that is enough. As I watched Mira sleep under the warm yellow light of our small apartment, I realized this journey had brought the two of us exactly where we needed to be. The Dalton family was no longer a place I had to struggle to belong to. After everything, I understood that love isn't found in bloodlines, it is found in the people who choose to stay. Mira and I had built a gentle, abundant life, a small but safe circle where the past could no longer reach us. And if there is anything I learned, it's that peace is a choice. Please like and subscribe to the channel so I can share more meaningful and beautiful stories with you in the future. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next story.